Welcome back to Revealing the Reading Brain. In part 2, we will look closely at the practices that we can employ to ensure alignment to the reading brain. Knowing the research is one thing, applying it to our instruction is another entirely. So let's talk about instruction. In this brief session, we will accomplish 2 things. Number 1, review the neuroscience behind the reading brain. We know so much more now than we did 30 years ago, and we can see the activity in the brain. And in 30 more years, we will know even more. Number 2, apply the body of evidence we refer to as the science of reading, which includes the neuroscience of how the reading brain functions, to our classroom practice. That is the primary focus of this session, our practices. Let's begin with some review. After each statement, pause the video to indicate a reading myth or fact. 1. When we read, the brain processes each and every letter in a word. This is a fact. 2. Letter reversals are a sign or indicator of dyslexia. This is a common myth and one we debunked by recognizing how the visual cortex was neurorecycled to recognize print. Letter reversals are very natural. 3. We store words based on visual memory. This is another common myth. We store words by connecting orthography to phonology to meaning. 4. Teaching students to memorize whole words can actually hurt the developing reading brain by lighting up the right side of the brain. This is a fact. For some students, whole word memorization can actually hurt the reading brain and light up the right side of the brain where struggling readers have shown activation. 5. The brain processes meaning first, and then the letters and sounds when reading. So we should focus on meaning and context when reading words. This is a myth, one that was perpetuated through whole language and balanced literacy. But we couldn't see the brain when those theories were proposed. But we can now. We know that meaning plays a role after the connection between letters and sounds to check our decoding. So how do we store words as sight words? Neuroscience has shed so much light on how words are stored for automatic and effortless retrieval. To store sight words, make a connection between the sounds, phonemes, and the letters, graphemes. Even the rule breakers follow some rules. Sight word vocabulary is not based on visual memory or visual skills. Learning to read automatically is orthographic, phonological, and then meaning-based, in that order. The visual part of reading is the ability to distinguish individual letters and recognize each one. So we need to shift practices from things like rainbow writing, different colored backgrounds, or whole word memorization, or any other activity that teaches students to use visual memory to store words. So if it's not a visual process, how are words stored? Dr. DeHaan explains that once a spelling pattern travels the long way from orthography to phonology to meaning, they can become automatized and stored in the brain's letterbox through a fast path. I know that I said that the reading circuit happens in a millisecond, but it can be even faster once the words are stored as sight words in the brain's letterbox. The brain has mapped these words for automatic retrieval, processing phonology and meaning simultaneously at this point. How do we get children to this point? Let's use another metaphor to demonstrate this. So here is my metaphorical letterbox. In a letterbox or mailbox, we can't get mail back out once the mail goes into the chute. The same is true for storage of sight words. Once we store these words through a process in the brain called orthographic mapping, then the words are in the letterbox forever. We cannot unlearn them. We cannot tell our brains, don't read this. It's impossible. But how do we get them into the letterbox? And how can we enable orthographic mapping in the brains of our students? We have to teach in a way that connects the orthography, letters, to the phonology, sounds. This enables us to store words long-term as sight words. But as I said, meaning is also important. It is the connection to meaning that is the final push for word storage. Meaning is the final step in the orthographic mapping process. This is why morphology as well can be such a powerful contribution to storing multisyllabic words. Teach morphology, especially in the intermediate and middle grades. It connects letters to sounds and their meanings in a beautiful way. So as we debunk the visual memory myth, we find another fact. The brain learns to read irregular words in the same way it stores regularly spelled words. We don't learn to read these words differently. Even when a pattern is unusual or a rule breaker, the brain still connects that spelling pattern to the phonology and then the meaning of our word, our oral language connection. So let's review the role of phonology and why it is so important to teach in a way that activates this processing system. Visual memory does not play a role in word recognition. Phonology does, by connecting the sounds to print or orthography. We need to map phonemes to graphemes for storage. We store and retrieve words via orthography, phonology, and meaning. Phonology is critical for word retrieval and also for accessing meaning. We read from speech to print. Phonology is a connector in the reading circuit to both orthography and meaning. This is powerful information for sight word recognition and learning new vocabulary. When we want children to store the meaning of vocabulary words, we need to connect to the phonology of the words intentionally. Have students hear and say the words, segmenting the syllables or phonemes in the words. Phonology anchors the meaning and the spelling in the brain. Phonology is powerful. This brings me to the final point here. Phonology maps the words orthography. Phonemes are the parking spots for print in the brain. Here we see again the connection of phonology to both meaning and orthography. Phonology is so critical in learning to read and in understanding the meaning of words. So let's look at an instructional example of how we can help students to store words, even irregular words, as if by sight. Let's take the irregularly spelled word thought. To help students store this word as a sight word, educators should teach them to connect the letters to the sounds in the word. So the letters TH map to th, OUGH maps to aw, the short O sound, and T maps to t. This instructional process is called phoneme-grapheme mapping, first coined by Catherine Grace. The problem with this word is that the OUGH is not a typical spelling pattern for the short O sound aw. So this grapheme OUGH needs to be learned by heart, as it is a tricky part of the word and an irregular spelling pattern. But here's the critical part. When our students ask why this word is spelled as it is, we need to build our capacity to explain to students. For example, the word thought is Anglo-Saxon, and the pronunciation was once very different. Over time, the word's pronunciation has changed, but the spelling did not. Knowledge of words etymology can help explain why some words are spelled the way they are. As teachers, we need to build our linguistic repertoire so that we can help explain the nuances of English spelling through many lenses: phonics patterns, location of a phoneme in a word, morphology, and etymology. Armed with this knowledge, even tricky spelling patterns, which are less than 40% of all words, make so much more sense to students. High-frequency words such as thought are often Anglo-Saxon, our oldest words. The spelling patterns of Anglo-Saxon can be readily recognized once students develop orthographic memory for them, which only happens when they connect the orthography to phonology to meaning. I don't think I have to explain the meaning of the word thought to my students. It is a tier 1 word anchored in most students' oral language, but if it was necessary, it would be easy to do. So here's a fun strategy for mapping phonemes to graphemes. There are a lot of variations of this practice, but this variation, tap it, map it, zap it, comes from the fabulous Judy Dodson in her book, 50 Nifty. She uses magnetic chips to represent the phonemes and a magnetic wand as a magic wand to zap the words when the students read it. Let's demonstrate with the word shout. Tap it. Tap the sounds in the word. Sh, ow, t. Map it. Use bingo chips to represent the sounds. One chip is used for each sound, so there will be 3 chips. Sh, ow, t. Graph it. Write the letters that represent the sounds. How do we spell sh? S-H. Ow, O-U. T, T. Zap it. Use the magnetic wand to zap the word, reading it from left to right. Shout. I also like to have the students then encode by writing the word on the line, saying each sound as they write it. Here's another variation borrowed from 95% group without the magnetic wands. Tap the sounds in the word clean. K, l, e, n. That's 4 sounds, so we will need to outline 4 boxes. Now write the letters that represent each sound in the boxes. C for k, L for l, EA for e, and N for n. The C and the L each need a separate box, as they are a blend and 2 distinct sounds. But the EA vowel team gets 1 box. Why? It's 1 sound. Finally, write the whole word, saying each sound as you write it. This type of guided practice can become more independent as students gain proficiency. It is important to give immediate corrective feedback during this instruction. After all, the students are growing dendrites. Practices like these help us connect the brain's processing systems to enable permanent word storage. Some students will master this quickly and grow the dendrites to connect the reading circuit with as few as 2 repetitions. Other students, like those with dyslexia, will need more practice and repetition. However, the practice should help the students to connect the processing regions in the brain, teaching to strengthen the left side of the reading brain, not to create competing pathways and instructional whiplash. So in all instruction, be sure to bring attention to each and every letter, connect those letters to sounds, and confirm with the meaning of the word or a connection to their oral language. This also requires systematic and explicit code-based instruction. Phonics can be overemphasized, and there is so much more to the science of reading research than phonics. Phonics instruction that is systematic and explicit, teacher-directed, following a scope and sequence, and teaching a few patterns at a time, from easier to more complex patterns, is beneficial for all children. It is harmful for no children, and even children who are gifted are better spellers with phonics instruction. As educators, it is important to know that for some children, phonics is so crucial that they will not learn to read without it. So teaching phonics should be part of daily literacy instruction. All children will benefit and become automatic readers. After all, until we properly understand how to promote permanent word storage, we will continue to have many weak readers. Our instruction determines the reading outcomes of our students. The reading brain can also inform our feedback to students. Here's some more audience participation. When a student encounters a word that they do not know when reading a text, what do you say to them? Pause and discuss with a colleague. Maybe you said things like, choose a word that makes sense. Look at the picture, or sound it out. Let's talk about feedback aligned to the reading brain. Remember the regions of the reading brain and the order in which we process words when we read them as good readers. We want to teach this process. So, the first thing we should tell students is to look at all of the letters. Why? Because that is what good readers do. They process each and every letter in the word. We want to avoid what I call sister, Susie, someone, which is when students look at the first letter and then guess words beginning with that letter. Then we tell students to connect those letters to the sounds to sound it out. Here we connect to the phonological processor. The first step was the orthography. And now we connect to phonology. Finally, we can ask our students, is this a word you know? Does it make sense here? We end with this connection to meaning. And finally, syntax. We don't ever start here. That's not how the reading brain works. Our instruction matters, but so does our feedback to students as they work through difficult words when decoding. Immediate corrective feedback has a strong evidence base, but the type of feedback matters. It's time for another activity. This activity is called Agree, Disagree, and Why. Take a look at this quote. Jan Hasbrouck is considered by many to be an expert of all things fluency. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? It is critical that we establish instruction that assists learners in becoming truly fluent readers rather than just fast ones. Why? Pause and reflect. This is not about a right or wrong answer, but about the conversation. Efficient decoding is a procedural skill that is learned in a similar way as riding a bike, juggling, skiing, knitting. Reflecting on your own learning in these areas can help boost your understanding of how to help beginning readers. Like other procedural skills, decoding develops best through direct instruction, followed by accurate practice at the student's pace. Slow and awkward is a typical phase for many learners. The challenges of struggling readers are brain-based. Poor reading is not primarily due to low motivation, living in poverty, experiencing trauma, or having few books in the home. It takes time to grow neural connections for many students. The speed or appropriate rate that we are looking for develops with accurate practice rather than rushing. Brain research now provides converging evidence that struggling readers have not developed the brain networks required for fast and accurate word recognition. Eventually, as students develop proficiency with the connections between processing systems in the brain, they will not only increase automaticity, but also the rate. But it is the slow and awkward phase that leads to this level of automaticity. As students work through making connections between letters and sounds and meaning, they are growing dendrites, which is slow and arduous work. It's important to know that trying to sound like a reader is only possible for many first grade children if they guess based on pictures and story clues. That is counterproductive to the reading brain and activates the right side of the brain, the wrong side for reading. Instead, work with students through the slow and awkward phase as they develop connections and become, after repetition, more automatic and then fluent. So don't skip the sounding out phase, and be sure to provide the appropriate number of repetitions through guided practice, or we do, that children may need. For some students, that could be 30 or more repetitions with a pattern. This is an example of a blending lines routine that can be done daily to practice previously taught patterns in words. Notice that the words look alike, forcing students to look at each and every letter, as good readers do. Eventually, as students become automatic at the word level, phrases and sentences can be placed in the grid squares to increase the complexity and build fluency with longer strings of words. Decodable texts are a fantastic way to build fluency in phonics instruction. Decodable texts are the only appropriate text in phonics instruction at the early phases of learning to read, early and later alphabetic phases and Aries phases. Once students reach consolidated alphabetic, decodable texts in phonics instruction are replaced with grade level passages. Grade level passages, and in some cases, below grade level passages, can be used to build fluency outside of phonics instruction, provided this instruction accompanies systematic and explicit phonics instruction. Another caveat here is do not use leveled texts that are predictable or repetitive. For example, I play at the park, I play at the school, I play at the playground. This encourages guessing and memorizing, which is counterintuitive to the growth of the reading brain. However, oral reading fluency practices are an excellent additional tool for using decodable texts in your phonics instruction. Fluency is so important, but we cannot skip to fluent reading or create the illusion of fluent reading through predictable passages or memorizing words. Fluency is the link between decoding and comprehension. It takes time to build fluency necessary to achieve comprehension. And practice to automaticity is critical in this regard. The only way to achieve fluency is through phonics and phonemic awareness instruction in combination, teaching patterns to automaticity. This strengthens the neural pathway in the reading brain and allows cognitive load to shift to comprehension of passages. It appears that the best approach to teaching fluency is to be sure that the student has proficient orthographic mapping skills. Fluency is not seen as a separate reading subskill, but rather as a byproduct of having instant access to most or all of the words on the page. And what about read alouds? Are they important? The answer is an overwhelming yes. Read alouds can be helpful in so many ways. Read alouds are not sufficient on their own, in that simply reading aloud to children will not teach children to read. But read alouds contribute significantly to the development of oral language, strengthening the meaning processor, build vocabulary, and teach complex syntax that is different from typical conversation. In addition, read alouds build background knowledge and give students both windows and mirrors to multiple cultures and experiences. By increasing the language comprehension skills of students, read alouds strengthen the reading brain. A large set of regions of the left hemisphere is identically activated when we read a sentence and when we listen to it. So what sections exactly? The regions associated with phonology and meaning are strengthened with read alouds as students are exposed to far more sophisticated language, vocabulary, and sentence structure than that of typical talk. Later, as print is added and students learn to decode, the orthographic processing system can tap into this strengthened neural network. Listening comprehension has been proven in multiple studies conducted through LARC, the Language and Reading Research Consortium, to predict later reading comprehension outcomes. We cannot underestimate the power of language. After all, the reading brain is a language brain first and foremost. The print is bolted on. But some children come to school with too little language, especially sophisticated and academic language, to support comprehension. When we wash children in waves of words, through read alouds, text sets, and experiences with the same topics, rich and complex oral language, and instruction to build background knowledge, we build the meaning and syntactic connections that can lead to later reading comprehension. So when all else fails, talk. The amount and quality of talk both matter. Next to decoding, vocabulary is one of the largest contributors to reading comprehension. Many children with poor vocabulary can have later reading comprehension difficulties. So begin early in building background knowledge and teaching the vocabulary of content areas to strengthen the meaning and syntactic networks, allowing children to engage in deep reading and comprehension through the completed reading circuit. So let's debunk a few more myths before we wrap up. 1. Teachers should use strategies such as rainbow writing, flashcards, and whole word memorization to build sight word recognition. This is a myth. Sight words, as we have learned, are stored through orthographic mapping, which involves connecting the orthography of a word to its phonology and meaning. 2. Systematic and explicit phonics instruction is beneficial for all students and harmful for none. This is absolutely true. Systematic and explicit phonics can improve the spelling and sight word recognition of all students. But for some students, it is essential for reading success. So teach phonics explicitly, and all students will grow their reading brains. 3. Read alouds are a fun activity for young children, but do not improve reading comprehension. This is a myth. Read aloud strengthen the same phonological and meaning networks of the brain as when students read to themselves. So, engaging in read alouds from a young age can build vocabulary and comprehension of complex sentence structures, long before students are proficient with the code. And they build knowledge of the world, which also contributes to reading comprehension. 4. Increasing students' spoken vocabulary can improve reading comprehension. This is a fact. As I said earlier, wash children in waves of words from infancy. Build a strong foundation in language, and the language brain will more easily transition to a reading brain with the right types of instruction. But vocabulary strengthens the connections between phonology and meaning in the brain. In addition, when students learn to decode complex vocabulary, they will have an oral lexicon to check themselves and know with confidence that they have decoded words correctly. So vocabulary builds both word recognition and language comprehension skills. So, what did we learn? 1. How the brain stores words as sight words. 2. Instructional practices that enable automaticity of word recognition. 3. Appropriate feedback when students misread words. 4. The role of fluent automatic reading. 5. The importance of vocabulary and read-alouds. It has been a pleasure to talk about the reading brain with you all. If I can answer any questions in the future, please feel free to reach out. I wish you the best of luck as you work to strengthen your instructional practices to align with the reading brain. And remember, your instruction changes the brain.